Hey everybody, I want to do a solution of our um, Acme products project. So I want to do it in a little bit of a different way than you might have done it. Part of the reason is that I want you to start to get comfortable with testing. Um, Not necessarily right off the bat to write your own test, but to follow getting your test to pass. Part of that is because for the assessments that you do, you have to get comfortable with testing. So I think that helps, where you don't get sort of um, what's the right word for it? The sort of noise of the test doesn't end up screwing you up. You're sort of familiar with the syntax of testing. So this is what we're going to be creating. Let's just think about what we have for a second. We've got a home page. We've got a products page. Okay. On the products page, we have a page where we can add a product. We can end up adding a product. We've got the ability to edit a product. And we also have the ability to delete a product. So very, very sort of standard, basic CRUD operations. And so the way that I'm going to set this up is I'm going to make a directory. I'm going to call it Acme Products. And I will cd into it. Okay. And I'm going to do an npm init. Okay. And what I want to be able to do is actually, I want to do some test-driven development. So if you're doing test-driven development, you're going to do something like npm test. Now, right now we just have this output that shows that says no test specified. Let me open up my editor of choice here. And let's pop this open here. Let me make this a bit bigger. So right now, if we look at our package JSON, we see that we're just echoing something out. And what I'm going to do, instead of echoing something out, I'm going to assume that we have Mocha set up. We're going to be able to run our tests with Mocha because we are, at this point, going to be testing our server-side code. And so I'm going to say nodemon, and I'm going to say /node modules Mocha bin Mocha, because that's where my Mocha is going to be installed. If I went to run this now, and I again said npm test, it would end up failing because it doesn't actually find Mocha. And that's good because Mocha is not installed. So let's install it. So I'm going to say npm install, and I'm going to say Mocha. And there's two things I need, Mocha and Chai. Mocha for the testing library. Mocha is going to have the definitions of our describe and our it blocks. And Chai is going to be our assertion library. I don't need to save this when I deploy my application. So I'm going to say save dev. And now I'll have Mocha. And if I go back here, I'll see that Mocha and Chai were installed as dev dependencies. And now I could say npm test. So by default, Mocha is going to be looking for tests in a directory called test, which doesn't exist. I could actually go in here and say make directory test and run npm test again. And it'll pass even though I have no tests. And the only reason why it passes is that it sees, all right, well, I do have a folder for tests even though I have no tests. There are two things that I'm going to test out. So I'm going to create a file here. I'm going to call this product model.spec.js. And in my product model, which doesn't exist yet, and that's fine, that's what these tests are going to end up sort of teasing out, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put a describe block. What do I want to describe? My product model. And I'll say, for starters, it exists. So your testing is going to be a series of describe and its. And again, you didn't necessarily have to do the project this way, but I want to go down this path so you get a comfort zone of seeing these tests. And I'll say, what do I expect? Well, this is going to fail immediately. I expect product, which is going to be my product model, to be okay. We always do our models in capitals. They're singleton objects, and this is just something that is done by convention. So you could recognize your models, and here get an error that we might not have thought, but we say expect. We see expect is not defined. Well, how come expect is not defined? Because when we're using Mocha, we actually have to bring in our chai library, and chai library has an expectation library, and I can grab its expectation function, and then I can use it. So I'm saying, hey, look, use the expectation function. I'm not calling it. I'm grabbing it, use it from the chai library, and at this point, I get a different error that product is not defined. If I wanted to get my test to pass, again, a big part of testing is you're going from a red to green cycle. I could theoretically just do this and say product is some empty object literal, and my test will pass. But that's not really what I'm looking to do. What I'm looking to do is to do something like product, and I'm one level down, I'm in my test directory, / product model. And if I go back here, it'll tell me, hey, look, I can't find your product model. So I'll go back here. I'll create a product model.js, and my test will be back to passing. Now, what is my product model supposed to do? Well, let's start putting in a couple of methods here. Let's say that I'm going to describe that my product model get products. What's get products going to do? Well, let's say that we expect, and we'll put some data in our database just to make things a little bit easier for us. But we'll say it returns 3 products. So again, a lot of code with our tests. In fact, we have written absolutely 0 lines of source code at this point, right? We've just written some test code. Test code could be verbose, doesn't really matter. You could dry it out at some point if you want, but it's a little bit less of a focus. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say expect product get products, and I'll say .length to equal 3. I'm going to assume that I'm seeding my data with 3 products, foo, bar, and buzz. And if I do that, I'll get a pretty simple message. And in fact, why don't we move this to the side here so we can see these as we're writing this. Give ourselves a little more room to work. And so now we've got our get products. We can see that it's failing here. And let's actually open up our product model. So our product model, we're going to use module.exports. And I'll say get products is going to be a function. Now if I go back here, I'll see, hey look, it's not returning anything. If I just return an empty array, I'll see that I expected it to be, I expected 0. I ended up getting 0. My actual was 0, but I really expected this to be 3. And so what are we going to do here? Well, let's create our products. And we'll give this an array of 3 values. We'll say ID 1, name is foo, ID of 2, name is bar, ID of 3 is foo bar baz. And we'll say when you go to get products, return this internal product. So products is internal to this object. when we talk about the public interface of this object or this module, we're talking about what a user can end up accessing in this module. And the only method that they have at this point is get products, and that should be enough to get this to pass. So let's do another few of these. Okay. Let's actually do the delete. How's the delete going to work? So we're going to describe delete product, and we'll say, what is it supposed to do? It deletes a product. And we'll go over here and we'll say, expect product, delete product. And we'll end up passing this. And this actually, instead of putting this in an expectation, let's just say product, delete product. And we're going to delete a product based on an ID. So let's say we'll end up deleting our product with an ID of 2. And this is going to fail right off the bat. And in fact, if we ended up deleting a product, we would have an expectation that we'd only have 2 products left. That right now, we don't even have a method for deleting a product. So let's actually create that method. And the first thing that I want to do here is I want to find the product that I want to delete. And I'm passing in an ID. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say product. And again, this is within my module. So I could use the this keyword, which is going to be my product class, my product module. And I'll say this get product. And I'm going to be able to get a product by an ID. Now, obviously, I can't do that yet. But assuming I can do that, I'm going to say, hey, look, the index of the products is this dot get products, index of product. And assuming I could get the index, I'm going to say this dot get products, I want to splice. I want to basically change you. And what do I want to change you? Well, I'm going to start at the index that I found, and I'm going to remove one item. I'm going to splice this guy away. Of course, this is going to fail because there's no get product method. Get product method is fairly simple, and I'm making this public because I assume I'm going to want to have some detail page somewhere, so I might need it. How do I go and I get a product? I'm going to use this get products, and I'm going to filter. So filter basically is going to loop over all of the products. And which one do I want to filter on? Well, I want to filter on where the product's ID is equal to the ID that I was passed in. So now, filter ends up giving me back an array. I have to return. I don't want the array. I want the first item. Now, granted, maybe I could put some error checking here and say, hey, look, if you don't give me an ID, that if I don't find anything here, maybe I'll return null. But I'm going to go down a happy path at this point and assume I'll find something. And if I run this dot get products, I did this a couple of times, this dot get products, I actually have to call it. And I did the same mistake here. Okay, so that's fine. That looks like it works, but let's just talk about it a little bit. One of the problems that I'm going to run into here is that I'm actually messing around with my data as I end up running my test. Now, that's okay. The only problem is that if I was to go and take this, these tests are running in order. If I was to go and take this test and run this test above this test, now it'll end up failing. And the reason why it's failing is that I'm basically manipulating my database. I'm deleting a product. So now when I go and test this, okay, there's no longer 3 products. There's 2 products. So one thing that I want to do here is that before each of my tests, no matter which test I run, I'm going to say to my product, hey, look, product, do me a favor, just reset yourself. set yourself back to your 3 basic products so I can test you. And if I do that, I'll run into an issue because product reset doesn't exist. Product reset is going to be pretty simple. So product reset is basically going to just reset the value of products. Now, what I could do here is just say products. I mean, literally, I could copy this here. I don't want this to be a local variable, so I don't want that var here, because that would just be a local variable. I want to take this products that's outside here and reset it. And that's what reset ends up doing. So that ends up passing, but you can see there's a little bit of redundancy here. You know, if I decided to change how I was seeding my data, things would be a little bit different. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say seed is equal to this array. And when I go down here in my application starts, I'll say I could go over here and I could say products equals seed. Right, so this is my seeded data. And then when I go to reset, again, I could say products equals seed. Right, so I mean, the way to sort of think about that is that I have this array, and I'm saying underscore products points to that same array. And actually, this will not work, but let's try to figure out why in a second. Yeah, so this is actually not going to quite solve my problem. Let me actually fix this. And what we'll do here is we'll just put this function in here called seed. And what seed is going to do is it's going to say products equals this array. And when my application ends up running, and let's actually define products. So when my module loads, and the module will only end up loading once, I'll say seed. So now products contains these 3 values, and when I go to reset, I'll say seed. So I'm actually not even putting it on the module itself, and we could roll this in a little bit easier, but this seed function basically is creating a new array for my products. I'm seeding it when my module loads, and I'll reseed it whenever I want to call reset. And that should be enough for my test to pass. You'll see when we actually start working with real databases and we want to test, we want our database to be in a certain state, and we'll do it by seeding the database with enough information that we can end up testing out our database. So now that we have our delete product, let's go and see what our other methods are. We could delete a product. How about update a product? So what are we going to do when we update a product? Well, in this case, let's say I'm going to call in. I'll do this on, this is going to be our bar, and I'll say here's our ID, and I'll say name is equal to bar. All right, so I'm changing it to uppercase, in which case I could say product, get product, 2, and I should find out that this product, its name, is going to equal uppercase bar. And just to make sure that this really works, let's go over here, and we will we could go here, and when we start out, we'll expect that the product's name is going to equal lowercase bar. We'll call update. We'll get the product again. We don't need to recreate this variable, but we'll get it again from our fake database, and we'll see that its name is now uppercase. So right now we don't even have an update product. Well, we should have an update product, but we're actually not even getting that far, because in fact it's actually failing over here, right? It's failing right here, although this update product should fail. Let's just see. Expected. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not even making it down that far. So we're starting out, our data is seated like so it's actually uppercase bar, and now we should see you don't have an update product method, which we expect. So let's add it. It's going to be very similar to delete product. In fact, I'm going to copy and paste here. And when I go to update a product, I'm going to pass in an ID. And I'm going to pass in what I'm calling our attributes here. And so when I say product, I'm going to end up getting the product with the ID. The only thing I'm going to change here is my name. And I'll say product.name equals attribute.name. And again, when you think about these attributes, this would be form values that we'd be passing in. And in this case, we would be updating the product with the name that we ended up passing in. And this should end up passing. So we're almost done with our CRUD operations. We've got delete, we've got update, we've got get, and we'll save the best one for last. And what we'll do here is that we'll test out so CRUD, let's make this CRUDish by saying create product. So it creates a product. So what's going to happen when we end up creating a product? Well, let's first create a product. We'll say product, create, and here we're just going to say name Quug. And what do we expect to happen there? Well, at that point, we'll say expect product. Since these get added in order, get products. We'll say at this point we should have 4 of these, so we're going to have 1 at our 0, 1, 2, 3. So we'll have 1 at an index of 3, hopefully. And let's just check that its name is equal to Quug. So we don't have a create method. Let's actually be consistent here. We'll call it create product, although nothing would be a problem if we ended up changing that. We could do that. What's nice is that we have these tests that we could run. So what I'm going to do is do this create product. This is the one that's a little bit tricky. So what do we do when we create a product? Well, the hard part is we need to get our ID of what we want to create. So we're going to go in there with some attributes. Our attributes are just an object. And so what we're going to do is we're going to want to find the max ID. So just to make this a little bit more what we expect, if this ID was 4, we would expect that when we end up going in here and we end up doing this, that the ID of this is going to be 5, right? If it was 4 to start out with, we're going to want this to be equal to 5. And for that, we're going to end up using our reduce function. Again, nothing's going to change here, right? Because we're not doing anything with our create product here. It says I can't read name of undefined. So we end up looking at product, create product. What we're going to do here is we're going to say max equals this, get products. We're going to reduce. The reduce function gets passed. You could call this whatever you want to. This is sort of like your running value that's going to have a starting point. I like to call it memo. And we're also going to be looping over our products. So this reduce function takes a function. That function takes 2 parameters. And we have to give it an initial value. So we're going to give it an initial value of 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to loop over each of our products, and we're going to say if product.id is greater than memo, okay? Now, if there are no products, we won't end up looping through here at all, and max is just going to have an ID of 0. But if we do make it through here, then we could say, hey, look, the memo is now going to be equal to our product.id, and we'll go in here and we'll return our memo. So one of the key things of using reduce is to make sure you're going to return what ends up going through the loop next. Here, we're using it to find a max value, but don't forget that reduce can end up being used to do anything that you want to with the collection to reduce it to another value. We're reducing our collection to the max ID of that collection. That's what we're using it for. So once we have our max, we can increment our max by 1, and we could say this, get products, and we could say push, and we could say the ID is max, and the name is the attribute name. And now, this should end up passing. I see I have a misspelling here on create products. Let me just point out one other thing that's kind of interesting. So if you decided to make changes, you have these tests that are running. Let's say that you didn't want this method to be called we have this method over here, and we've got this method update product. Just for the sake of argument, let's say we wanted to change this to update instead of update product. We could do that. Our tests are going to fail, but then we could go back here and change this to update. Okay? On the same token, if we wanted to say, hey, look, why do I have to call this create product? This is in my product model. Let me just call it create. I can do that. Fails. I go back here. I change this to create. Let's say that I didn't want to call this delete product. I just wanted to call this delete. Now this lights up because delete is a reserved word. So instead of messing around with the reserved word, instead of calling this delete, I'm going to call this destroy. Now I'm just working in the reverse direction, and when we call destroy, this is going to be destroy, and we'll come back here and we'll say destroy. And on the same token, just as a last thing, let's say that we did decide to change this from get products, which is a little bit verbose, and we decided to call this list. Right, we're going to have a bunch of failures here. But we could just go back here, and everywhere we have get products, we could call it list. We could call this, go back and change it here, list. We're calling this in a bunch of spots, so probably a copy, find and replace would be better. List, list. And again, assuming our coverage is good for our tests, that should be enough to give us confidence that this change would work. Let's see if we got everything. And if we do that, of course, we've got to go back here and make that same modification. List. Should be getting another test to pass. And go through here. And this is going to be list. This is actually going to be get product. That one I didn't change. And we've got list here. Again, the nice thing about making these changes is that you sort of know when you're done, because if your tests are giving you decent coverage, then you know you should be in good shape. And we should probably update the names of our tests. We want to test list. We want to test create. We want to test update. And so here we seem to have, we're missing something, line, let's see, line 28 of our product model. So if we go down to 28, we missed the get products. On the same token, if this was when we end up looking at databases, this is probably going to be a different command. Instead of it being get product, let's again make it more concise, and we'll say this is going to be a method called find one. And if we do that, right, we could change that here. So instead of get product, we'll say this is going to be find one. We have it in our update. And that's actually incorrect. This is going to be this dot find one with our ID. And now if we do that, this is going to fail. But if we go back here and change this to find one, find one. I think those are the two places that I put it. Our test should pass. So at this point, we've got coverage for our product model, which is good. It's a pretty lightweight class. The one thing that you're seeing here is that you should be able to test this model outside of any Express application. I mean, theoretically, you don't have to use it within an Express application. It could be, you could create some kind of console application that deals with data. So, if you're looking at the functionality within this module, it's very specific functionality that's just dealing internally with this data to be able to, do things, do these CRUD operations, get all of them, find one of them, create, update, and delete. And that's what these tests are doing for us. Again, notice our test file is 44 lines, right? This is something close to it. But this is probably even a little bit easier to understand than, going in here, which has a bunch of different nested functions, which is the way that our tests end up getting written. So the next thing we're going to do is see how we can write tests out for an Express application. By the way, notice I've got this code written. I've never actually started an Express app. Haven't started a server. I don't even have Express as part of my project. And yet I've still written a significant part of this just by doing the testing. So the next thing that we'll look at is how to actually create and test an Express app. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to really start testing out, what I want to do is start testing out my routes. So I'm going to actually create a routes spec.js. And I'm going to go through this, again, there's going to be a module that I'm going to need to do this, but let's say, for the sake of argument, first let me bring in my expectation library. Okay, so here's my expectation library, and let me bring in, because I'm probably going to need it, my product model, require, / product model. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to describe my routes. So we know we have a home route. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we just want to test that if we end up going to that home route, that we see the words welcome. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say describe. And I'll say what I want to describe is my home page, or my / route. Well, how am I going to describe it? Now we know that when we end up testing something that's on the server, we're going to be dealing with something that's asynchronous. So let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that I had some object, an object that I don't currently have. And with that object, I could do something like this. I could say, hey, look, I've got my application. Make a GET request to my application. And, since this is going to be asynchronous, what I can specify is, hey, look, when I make that, I expect to get a successful response. So I'm expecting a 200. And on top of that, when I'm done getting my data, because when you end up making requests for data, the data doesn't come in all at the same time. But what I'm going to expect when I get my data and when I'm done getting my data, that I'm going to put a function in here. Maybe I'll get an error when my data ends up coming in. And I'm going to get a response. I'm going to take this out for a minute just to make this a little bit easier. So let's pretend that we have this application that exists. So I'm going to make a get. I'm going to get a response. And if I end up getting an error, I'm going to do something. Now, first of all, the problem with this is that I want to put some expectations in here. What I want to be able to do is to do something like, hey, look, I expect my response is going to be a text response because that's what HTML is. And one of the things that Chai has is the ability to test that this is going to contain, and I'm going to say I'm going to expect to contain the words welcome. So I expect my response.text to contain the word welcome. But I have to be specific and say, hey, look, when do I want these expectations to run? Because things are going to be asynchronous. So what this gives me the ability to do, and I actually am missing a little step here, I apologize. I'm describing the home page and has the text welcome. So again, you always have your describes and your its, and so this should actually be nested within this guy. So again, I'm assuming that I have some object, some application that I could call get on, that I could say, hey, look, when you're done getting your data, I want to run this code, but I also have to be specific with Mocha and say, hey, look, Mocha, at this point, Mocha gives me the ability to say if something is asynchronous, pass in a done. And even though it has my expectations, it won't run my expectations until I end up saying done. Now, I didn't make this up. This is not my module. What I'm going to be using, and if I went to run this, again, you could say my app is not defined here. And in fact, what will end up happening here is that eventually this thing is not even giving me any sort of indication that this is failing, because in fact, I'm never actually even getting in here to calling done. So here, there's something going on in terms of my tests not running, and actually, I should be a little more careful. It is what I needed there, and then when I do this, right, it's going to tell me, hey, look, I don't know what app is not defined. So what is app? Well, we're going to use something called supertest. And what supertest does is that it wraps around an express application. Now, the best way that I could show you that is that here is a require for supertest. Here is an app. And if you end up wrapping your express application, which is your app, within supertest, supertest will allow you to call methods like you would in a browser. So the same verbs that you end up seeing in your routes, you could end up calling them here on your app. Let's just see what that looks like. Let's do enough to just get this to pass. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an app.js. And when I go into my routes, just so I have a little bit less noise here, I'm going to say only over here. This way I've only got those tests running. App is not defined, and that I expect. And I'll go over here, and I'm going to say that what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my app is going to be equal to, and I'm going to require supertest. Supertest takes an express application. Because what supertest is going to do is that supertest is going to actually start a server and internally make requests to that server. we're not going to have to start the server. We're only going to have to basically satisfy this by passing in an Express app. And how are we going to get our Express app? Well, we're not going to get it yet, but we're going to require, and I need to go up one level to my app. So I'm going to take an app that I'm going to create, which is going to be up here. And I'm going to pass it in to supertest. So supertest, when I do a require on that, it gives me a function. I could break this up into two tests by doing this. Supertest equals require, supertest, and then calling supertest. But supertest is going to allow me to create an application. Now, before I use it, let's go back here. I'm going to kill this. And I'm going to install two things. I'm going to say npm install supertest. This one I just need for development, so I'm going to say save dev. But then I'm also going to need Express, and this I actually need for my application, so I'm going to save that. And now when I go back up here, what I'm going to do I'll open up my app, and I'll do the standard Express equals require Express. And I'll go over here and I'll say app. This is my Express application. And we didn't do this before, but I need to do this for testing. And what I'm really doing is I'm going to be separating out where I'm actually listening, starting my server. I'm going to separate that out between my Express application. So my app is just going to be dealing with my Express application. So I'm going to say module.exports equals app. And now, if I were to go back here and look at my tests and say npm test. So again, right now I'm not getting anything, I'm not starting any server here, but notice I get an error here. It says I got a problem, I don't have get. So when I end up making this get request, right, I can't get this response. So let's actually just do one other thing here. Let's kill this one. We don't need to test out our product model here. We're just going to keep these two things open. And so what I'll do here, I'll say, I'm going to go back to my app, and I'll say app.get when you go to slash. Just to get our test to pass, I'll say response.send welcome. And that passes. Now, obviously, this is not really what we want to have. We want to have an HTML page there. So let's actually go through and actually get this to pass, and we'll bring in our Swig templates and all that stuff. So I'm going to start out by saying response.render. And this is going to be our index page. And we'll pass a title, and we'll put in our title, welcome. In which case, we've got a big error here. This has to do with the fact that we didn't have any default engine specified. So let's go in here and start bringing in our Swig npm install Swig, and we'll save it. And we'll do our 3 lines of Swig, which is going to be Swig, require Swig, Swig set defaults, cache false. And after we create our app, we'll say app set view engine HTML, and now we're going to have to define our view engine. App dot, let's forget whether it's engines or engine. App dot engines. This is going to be HTML, and it's going to be Swig render file. Let's just see what happens here. So it's not engine, which is nice. Again, I haven't loaded anything up in a browser at this point. It's going to be app engine. So I'm saying, hey, look for an HTML page. And in fact, when you find an HTML page, use Swig's render file. And probably the error that's up here is, hey, look, I can't find this view. So let's get it to find this view. And we'll just speed things up a little bit. Views. And let's we'll create a layout.html. And we'll also add a index.html. And so in my layout, I'm going to do HTML, head. I'll eventually bring a style sheet in here, but I don't really need it for the moment. Here's my body. Here's my body. Here's the end of my HTML. And I'll go in here and I'll say, for my body, I'm going to put a block. And my block is going to be I'm going to call my block main. Sometimes I call it content. Here I'm going to call it main and block. I'll save that, and I'm going to go back to my index, and I'll say this is going to extends layout.html, and I'll put my block in here. And simply I'm going to say that, hey, look, when you end up coming here, just show the title. And just so it looks like maybe something decent, I'll put it in an H2. And one thing that happens here that's kind of interesting is that by default, NodeMon only looks for JS files changing. Doesn't really look for the templates changing. I could probably fix that, but for the moment, I'm just going to run my test again. And that's going to be enough to get my test to pass. You always want to sort of go from a failure to a passing. So if I take this out, kill this, run it again, it'll actually show you my HTML. You don't see the title in there, but I could do that. And again, I'm going to have to be forced to sort of start and stop this a little bit, but then you'll see that this will end up passing. So I went in here and I did just enough to get my Express to set up. Again, I haven't ended up going in here and I haven't looked at this inside of kill some of this stuff. I haven't looked at this within the context of a browser at all. I'm just setting this up here. Again, not a lot of code that's here, but the thing that I'm separating out, notice I'm not doing any of the app .listen on a port. I'm going to end up doing that, but I'm showing you that you could actually, with test-driven development, it's kind of interesting. You could get things, done without necessarily even, opening up a browser, which I think is kind of cool. So let's look at a couple of other things here. What else do we expect? Well, let's describe another route. We're going to describe the products route. And what do we expect with the products route? We'll say the products route shows the products. So with our products, we expect to have foo, bar, and baz. And if we go over here, we won't see that. And if we actually go over here and we say we're going to be RESTful and we're going to go to the products route, right? It'll say, hey, look, I don't know what that is. You haven't defined it. So let's go in here and we'll actually create a router. And we'll do it by saying app.use. And we'll say, hey, look, we're going to sort of mount this products path to a require. And we'll say /, hold on 1 second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this router, and this is going to be, I could say routes, products. Right, see, you're probably going to have multiple routes here. This doesn't exist yet. and we're going to be sort of working off this for a little bit. So let me go in here, and I'm going to create a routes folder, and I'll say this is going to be products.js, and I'll create my router. So your router is going to be nothing more than telling Express to create a router for you. Routers have verbs, and I'll say router.get slash is going to do something. And you also want to make sure module.exports equals router. Again, some people, when you first look at this, you assume, hey, look, maybe I'm exiting when it does module exports, but it's just exporting this object, and this object will have other properties that you're going to end up adding to it. So what I want to do here is I'm going to say product, my product model, is going to be require. I'm going to go up one level to my product model. And here when I go to call get, just to get this to pass, I'll say response.send, just as this will just basically send JSON data to the client. And I'll say product, and we ended up calling it list. In which case, it looks like we're timing out here, and why would we be timing out? So router.get, and let's just take a look. And see what this is doing here. So one of the things, let's just sort of dig through this a little bit, see what might be happening here. Oh, so the reason why this is happening is we're never calling done. I'm going to call done here. And then if we do that, we'll see products. And by the way, if you just wanted to look at if you wanted to see what that response looks like, if I say console.log response, and this is what Supertest ends up using, you'll see that there's a lot of data here that I could test, right? Actually here, it's kind of interesting. You're seeing that the content type is actually JSON, because when I send JSON data back, it basically assumes that that's what I want to send back to the client. Here are my status codes. The data itself, the body is here, and I could also get that in the form of text over here. But if you were testing this out, and you could also do this with JSON data if that's what you wanted to send back, but that you're not going to do until you end up sort of making AJAX calls back to the server. So I just wanted to do that to be able to do enough to get this to pass. Now what I want to do is, instead of sending that back like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say there's going to be a render, and this is going to be products, and I'm going to send back some data from my templating engine. My title is going to be products, and my products are going to be product list. And here I'll end up getting an error, and the reason why I'll end up getting an error is because it's not going to end up finding that route. So we'll go in here, and let's go over here, and we'll say we're going to have a products.html. And here again, I'll extends layout, and here I'll put a block in for main. I'll end my block, and I'll go over here and I'll say here's an H2. I'll put in my title. We could always pull this out into our layout page at some point. And now if we end up going and do this, we'll do a for loop, and I'll say for product in products. And this is going to be, I'll do an end for. This is going to be an ordered list, an unordered list. So now I'll go in here, and I'll say this is going to be product.name. Let's see, this should be enough. Now again, it's not picking up the HTML page, so I'm going to kill this, Control-C, and just rerun it. No such file or directory. Nothing. Yeah, I've done this before. It's not layout, it's layout.html. And again, I got to do something so it watches for those files. And here it ends up, now you can see that I could end up seeing my products. Let's do a couple of other ones of these, see how quick we could sort of get this done. So we know that we're going to have to do have a page where we can edit a specific product, and also where we can end up inserting data. So let's describe a route. Actually, let's be more specific. Right, a route is going to be a verb and a path. And here we'll describe a route for, let's do our delete. Where we're going to want to go in here and show that we can delete products. So let's say we're going to delete our bar object. And so what we expect to have happen here is that we expect to be able to delete. And when we end up getting in here, let's say we're going to delete this. Now here we're going to end up getting, what we really want to do is do a redirect here. But one thing we could do is we could say that we expect, this might not be the best way to test it, but this should work, is that we expect at this point product.list.length to equal 2, right? Because we will have deleted a product at this point. So first of all, if we run this, one of the problems that we're getting into here is that that doesn't happen. There's also other issues that we're going to end up running into. We don't actually even have a delete route for this. And in fact, if I was to do a console.log so I'm not seeing any error. That's kind of interesting, which I would have expected to see. Nevertheless, let's actually see if we could get this to work. So we're expecting to be able to tell our app to delete with this route. If we go back to our products route, I'm going to tell my router, you're going to delete, and you're going to delete, we're going to pass you in an ID. And when we end up going to delete, even though I don't have any UI for this, I'm still able to set up my routes. And here I'm going to say product destroy request params .id, and we'll multiply this by 1. That should end up deleting the product. And here I'm going to say response, we want to redirect you, right? Whenever we end up destroying data, we're going to redirect you back to products. If we do that, we should end up getting this test to pass, right? So we've actually set up our delete route. There's a couple of other routes that we have to do. Let's actually set up, we're actually going to have to do a get. So let's go over here. And we know that we're going to want to have a form when we end up doing something like products. We'll have a route. Now this is sort of arbitrary, whatever you end up calling this. We'll say products when we call the route add shows add form. So what do we expect when we have an add form? Well, let's just say that we expect our response.text to contain, and let's say we're going to have a button that says create product. Again, this route doesn't exist. When we go to add here, this is going to be products/add, which is a route that doesn't exist. And it's telling us we cannot get this route. So let's go back to our products. And when we end up clicking on, when we have a route called add, we're not going to pass back our products. We'll create a view called add and the title's going to be add product. Of course, we don't have that yet, so let's go over here and create it. I'm going to cheat a little bit by, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to call this add. And instead of this being this form, this unordered list, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use a little bootstrap, even though I don't have it yet. I'm going to do a form. This is going to be, I know this is going to be adding, so for a RESTful route, it's going to be post. Method is going to be post. Action is going to be, for a RESTful route, which is going to be /products, which is something else we'll be able to test out. I'm going to put a label in here. Actually, I'll do a div class. Bootstrap has this idea of a form group. Then I could do a label. And then I could be an input class of form control. I want this to go in as a form. I want it to go in with a value of name. So this looks a little weird, but it's going to be name is equal to name. And we're not even going to see this, but we're going to be able to sort of test it out. I'm going to get this to pass by doing, here's a button. Type is going to be submit. And let me just give it a bootstrap class so it looks like something nice when we get to it. This is going to be button primary. And we'll say create product. And this should pass because now this is going to be, now I've got my route set up for adding. This is going to take me to the add form. And this should end up passing. And let's just, under the same token, let's also set this up for, there was actually one other thing that I wanted to do here. So in my route spec, the order again is going to be important. If I was to go over here, notice I put my delete down here. This is something we saw before too, but if I move my delete up above this one, I'm going to get a failure. So we run into this problem because of this. You know, we're deleting and then we're testing something out. So again, one thing you could do here is in this route, do it before each for all of these. And say product reset, right? We have that reset, which will, you know, set us back to all of our products, and that'll work. So I'm going to add another route here. This is going to be a route for edit. You know, what do I want to have happen when I go to edit? Let's assume that I'm going to edit bar. So if I go over here to products, edit, again, to get me into this route, I'll say, well, what do I want to do? I want to say, hey, look, products 2, go to your edit form. Again, this is a little bit arbitrary as to what you end up calling these, but this is going to be my edit form, and I'll say this is going to do the edit form. And then when I go over here, I'm going to end up calling this, and I'm going to say, just for simplicity, this is going to be edit product, and that's not going to work because that route doesn't exist. And let's go over and we'll end up creating that route. So I'll go back here, and similar to our add route, the only difference here is that this is going to be passed an ID, in which case I'm going to be able to get that product by saying product, and we have that method find1, and we'll say request params ID, and we'll multiply it by 1. So it'll end up getting treated as an integer. And here, instead of doing add, we'll say edit. We'll say edit product. And we'll say product is equal to this product. And so we could do that. We won't end up getting our So what we could do here, and I have this incorrect. It's going to be get, and it's going to be edit, and I'll get a different error because it can't find that view. So I'm going to go over here, and again, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'll call this edit, and I'll go over here, and then this I want to use my method override here. This is still going to be a post, but it's going to be going to products, and this is going to be the products ID that I pass it, and I'll say method equals, and this is going to be a put, and this button is going to be edit product, and this is going to be a value here, which is going to be product.name. I can test for some of that stuff too. Again, it's not picking up this HTML change, but if I do that, I should get that to pass, shows the add form, shows the edit form. The last thing that I want to do here, there's two more routes to really add, is that I want to be able to test that I could actually go in and I could end up inserting a product. So this is a little bit more complicated. We've got we've got our products here, and let's actually look at our product model. So let's say that we wanted to test that we could end up editing this bar, and we wanted to do it through a route. How could we go about doing it? Or we wanted to insert something. Let's start with the insert. Might even be a little bit easier. So let's describe. Again, I'll cheat a little bit here. We're going to describe that we could end up posting to products. And so go over here, and we'll say that this is going to insert a product. So how do we send this data? First of all, this is going to be a post, okay, to products. So one of the things that Supertest gives us the ability to do is to actually send data. And so we're actually just going to send our data in the form of a URL encoded string, because that's what our form is going to do. And so we'll say we're going to create a new product called Quug. And just to see that this works, what we're going to test, we'll say expect product, and this should actually give us we'll say find one, and since this would be an ID of 5, right, because our highest was 4, expect product find one dot name to equal Quug. Right, because this is our product model. We've got 4, so the next one should be Quug. And of course, that doesn't quite work, right? So a couple of things that we need to do here. We need to go to our routes, and we're going to have a post route. And we'll go over here, and we will, when we go over here, we're going to say, hey, look, product, and we just called it create. We're going to pass our request body, because that's going to have our data in it. And we'll go over here, and we'll say, again, whenever we change things, we'll say response, redirect / products. Now, if we do that, right, this is not going to quite work out, right? Part of the reason why it's not going to work out is that we don't have our middleware here. So let's install that middleware. And so let's kill this, and we'll say npm install, and we'll say body parser. We'll save it. This is something that we're going to need. We'll get body parser. Again, you're going to be configuring these for your entire application. So we could say body parser equals require body parser. And we could go over here and we could say app.use, and we're going to do body parser, and this is going to be URL encoded. And there's an option on here, which we'll talk about at some point, but we'll say extended is false. That determines what body parser it ends up using. And just by doing that, we should get our test to pass, which they do. And so right now we actually do have, to some degree, the workings of an application that we could set up. And you know, we could go here. We'll do one more route just so we have it. Right? We've got our post. We've got our get. We've got our delete. Let's actually just do let's do a put just so we have it. So if we go and put, and let's modify our bar. We have food, bar, and baz, so we'll say if we go to put, this updates a product. So not when we post, but we put. And here we're going to say when we put, we're going to have to modify, so we're going to go in with an ID of 2. And instead of it being uppercase, lowercase, we'll make it uppercase. We know that this is 2. And we should see that it should get updated to bar. So we don't have that route here at the moment. And again, this is one of those routes where it's not rendering anything. But if we end up going in here, right, so that'll end up failing, right? Nothing changed, right? We actually weren't even able to get to that route. But if we go over here, we could do a put. And this is going to be to an ID. And instead of creating, we'll say update request params.id, and we multiply it by 1. And once we end up doing that, here's our put route. Our tests are, let's see, expected bar to equal bar, and let's see if we're passing in the right value here. Here's bar with a value of 2. Product.update. And let's see, I think probably what's happening here is that we haven't, let's test that out, see what's happening here. All right, so the problem that I have here is actually that it's request params ID, not param. And that should pass. And in order, when I was troubleshooting this, I actually put an only up here. So let me get rid of that. And let's actually just run our test suite. Okay, so now we've actually got all of our routes being tested, but we haven't actually looked at this in a browser. And we'll be in for some surprises when we do it. But let's talk about how we're going to move this Express app and actually set it up so we can look at it within a browser outside of the context of the tests. So what I really want to be able to do is to do something like localhost 3000, right? Which right now I don't have a server running. So how am I going to go and get that server running? So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to use this app. This app is just my Express file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another file called server. And within this server file, there's a couple of different ways that I could do this, but I'm going to bring in there's a module that's automatically included with Node called the HTTP module. And what the HTTP module can do is that you can create a server with the HTTP module, and in fact, this is what Supertest ends up doing. HTTP create server, and you can do it by requiring an Express application, right, or something that has routes, right? A server is basically something that deals with requests and responses. And you could go over here, and now I've got my actual server. And now I could tell my server to listen, and I'll say process environment port. And I'll just put a callback here that says console.log listening on process environment listening on And if I end up doing that, what we can do is that we can actually go to my package JSON file, and I could put in my start. And my start could be nodemon server, and actually let's give it a port. So now, instead of actually loading my Express application directly, I'm loading the server file, right? And the server file is loading Express. I'm separating out my server from my Express app, and the reason I did that was to allow myself to do testing. And now, if I do this and I go over here and I say npm start, this should start running. And if I go back here, it's not going to look too good, and I don't really have any of my routes here. But if I was to go over here, I could go to products. I could go to products.add, and so on and so forth. I bet you I could even add a product here, right? So that'll end up getting added. I could probably go over here and edit. So it's actually, I did it a little differently. I said products to edit. That's bar, so I could do this. And one thing you probably want to do is, so let's see, so one of the issues here is that even though I was able to test my routes, what I don't have here is I don't have my method override installed. So I could actually just get that set up by doing an npm install method override save. The body parser and method override. Method override is what's going to allow you to create your RESTful routes. And if I go back to my app, because this is again being configured in my Express app, I could say method override equals require method override, and I could say app.use method override, and there's a couple of different ways to configure this, but the easiest way is to say method override. Look for a parameter called method and use that as your action, and this is going to be method override. And let's make sure I do that correctly. I think I must have a misspelling here. Two R's. Okay. All right. So once I end up doing that, this should end up reloading. And in fact, if this did actually work correctly, I almost bet you I could reload this, and you could see that it did change the value. So the only thing really left to do is to, on your main page, put in some navigation to get to these two areas, put in a button for your delete so you could end up, testing that out, and that would actually, be enough for that solution. Anyway, I hope that you found this helpful, and we'll do another solution for the next assignment, which is the products and categories.